I have dedicated my professional career to the study and control of arthropods.
All right, this is part 3. I think it's going to be 5 parts now. I've kind of organized everything, and I think I can do this in 5 parts. This response is to Empty Without Jesus's More of Darwin's Theory Exposed video. I know it's one video. I'm making 5 parts to it, but I have to address these things in detail. And as you guys know, and I've said already in this series, I'm not the most concise of people at times. So I want to end this. You were talking about Ray Comfort's objections, or his approach to dealing with atheists, and I went through, his thing about all of it and I genuinely believe, like I said, I believe that Ray Comfort is one of those rare creationist leaders that's not really deliberately being fraudulent. I think he's not bright enough to recognize his mistakes. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe he's a complete fraud, but I'll give him the benefit of the doubt, assume that he's just a little too thick to recognize the flaw in his argument when he brings up this male and female, or this which came first, the heart, the blood. Because what that assumption is that all of these things have to come together spontaneously for each individual or each species, or for each, that you can't inherit these structures, or that they're not. It gets into irreducible complexity. It gets into this idea. Anyway, the point is that it shows the worst possible straw man of what evolution is about. Okay, he says the last one you mentioned of his is no transitional species in the fossil record, and I don't want to spend too much time on this. There's a lot of videos out there. I don't want to be one of those people that just says, I'm not going to take time on this. Here's another video to watch. Or here's a source. But I do want to say we do have tens of thousands of transitional fossils. These transitional fossils are exactly what Darwin predicted we would find. Darwin describes what he believes a transitional fossil would look like, based on the few that were known at the time, and there were some. He didn't say there was none, and I'll get to that later on when you actually discuss origin. But when the point is that exactly what scientists expected to see, we find those fossils, and they're exactly what we predicted they would look like. There's a few surprises now and again, but overall, we're finding what we expected, and I don't want to make that sound like, we're blinding ourselves, covering up one eye and squinting to find what we expected. We're finding what we predicted we would find if the theory were true, what Darwin said we would find if the theory were true. And we're finding tens of thousands of them. And I know the big famous ones people always talk about, Tiktaalik, the fish, Tiktaalik. And I know I saw one of your comments, you said it's just a fish. Well, it's just a fish that has an amphibian-like shoulder apparatus. It has nostrils that connect to the lungs. It has things that no living fish has. The only things today that have those structures are tetrapods. So it is a fish-like thing with tetrapod-like characteristics. It's exactly what we would expect to see in a transitional form. For example, when you move the goalposts and you say that's not a transitional form because it's not a squirrel with a rabbit's head or a rabbit with a squirrel's head, no scientist ever predicted such a thing would exist. If such a thing did exist, the chimeras, like you guys like to imagine, I've seen people talk about, we would expect to find whatever it is, the point is those things would disprove evolution. They would disprove the fundamental basics of genetics and phylogeny. Okay, we don't find those things because they simply don't exist. What we call a transition is something that is partway between what we recognize as an ancestral taxa and what we represent as a terminal taxa, as the final thing that we're looking at. Everything's really in transition. So if you take a bird, any bird, just choose a bird at random. What's a transition between a bird and we say, hey, we think this evolved from a reptile? What's the transitional form? Okay, there's a reptile. What's in between those two? We find a host of these feathered dinosaurs where we don't know. It's scientists that study them can't even make up their minds as to what line do we say this is a dinosaur, this is a bird. It really has no meaning in modern understanding of these things. What we have is that birds belong to a large group of feathered dinosaurs, some of which could fly, some of which couldn't fly, some of which subsequently lost their flight. Whatever. It's very, very complicated. We now know that bird evolution is phenomenally complex. But the point is that we have those transitions all throughout. And I study invertebrates, and invertebrate transitional fossils are so beautifully known and so beautifully illustrated. Much, much better than any vertebrate fossils. But the point is that I get people like, I even had Kent Hovind respond to me in an email years ago where I talked about all of the transitional forms between every single major group of mollusks, snails, squid, octopus, clams, and I showed transitional forms between all of the major classes and their ancestry, and he said, well, those are all one kind. You know, he dismissed it. He moved the goalpost of kind from species, kind to family, to kind to an entire phylum. Okay? Anyway, it's shifting goalposts. Now I'm going to finish this section up here. I was hoping I'd get further on. You mentioned about this is a common argument used by creationists, and again, you're exposing your sources when you use these kind of arguments. That Galileo, Newton, and Kepler were creationists, and they were smart people, so therefore we shouldn't dismiss creationists. Okay, I hope you understand. Maybe when you were saying it, a little twinge of like, God, that is such a crappy argument. I mean, if you think about it, you will recognize why that is. Galileo, Newton, and Kepler. First of all, none of them they weren't biologists in the first place, so they weren't studying life or the origins of life. So their belief in whatever their belief in that area is irrelevant to their study of physics or astronomy. Okay. But the point of that is that they were living in a time when creation was sort of the only argument for the origin of life and the diversity of life. Okay, I honestly believe that given the brilliance of those men, had they actually been studying biology, we may have had the theory of evolution a lot earlier than we did, or if somebody in there. But the point is they weren't studying that. I was thinking of a good way to word it. Okay. Galileo, Newton, and Kepler believed that the entire universe probably contained about 1 million or so stars. Okay? I think some of the estimates went up to 10 million stars total. And that was as big as the universe was. That's what they believed, right? So, can you argue right now, can you say, I believe the universe only has 1 million or to 10 million stars in it, and that's the entire size of the universe? And I can say, well, no, we can actually see billions and billions of solar systems, galaxies and stars within those galaxies. It's much bigger than that. And you can say, but Galileo, Newton, and Kepler were brilliant people, and they thought it was only 1 million, so therefore it's only 1 million. Okay? Do you see where the argument falls apart? To compare those guys to a modern creationist, that's what you say, discounting a modern creationist has at their disposal modern scientific knowledge, whether or not they choose to ignore it, which is what they do. They choose to. That's why you bring up these arguments. That's why every creationist I talk to brings up, did you know Archaeopteryx has this, this, and this? Therefore, it's not a transitional fossil. And I can state, well, first of all, that's not true, or what? Even if it is true, what about in the last 2 decades, the hundreds and hundreds of dinosaur bird transitions that have been found in China? All of those. What about all of those? They don't know about those. Oh, because we think that scientific discovery stopped when our creationist texts tell us it stopped. They don't recognize that science progresses on and on and on. The same arguments that I hear modern creationists using are the same ones in Henry Morris's scientific creationism. They're just the same exact, some of them almost word for word, as if science hasn't changed since the 1960s. All right, I'm going to stop there at this, and I will take this back up with your Lewontin quotes and then some more about Darwin.